Welcome to Milk and London's panel on purchase with purpose. It's a fascinating panel this morning, exploring how very different kinds of brands in different categories in different parts of the world are making purpose core to their brand's meaning and behavior. And this is a burgeoning area in industry today and in business today, reflecting perhaps, and I'm sure we'll discuss this further, profound changes in technology, consumer desires, and ongoing global uncertainties. And research studies, I think, have shown that far from being corporate social responsibility on steroids or boardroom passions being kind of borne out in the real world, price points for these brands track ahead of conventional brands and products, as well as, of course, being a catalyst for change in the world. And we've got a fantastic panel of leaders here from different scales of business with eclectic mix of business, social, political, and entrepreneurial backgrounds, but above all, purpose. So first of all, I'm going to introduce the panel. So first, on my left, Natalie Deacon, who's the Global Comms Director of Avon Cosmetics, has a long career at Avon. And Avon, I don't know if you know, is a company that has been empowering women before they were allowed to vote, even in the US. Mike Coop, to my right, CEO of Sainsburys since 2014, a business that since inception has been guided by a value-based ethos. Mike worked before Sainsburys at both Asda and Big Food Group. Nick Reed, in this fantastic suit at the end on the right. By the way, at Milk and events, often everyone's in kind of grey suits. You've definitely got the most colourful panel here today, which is terrific. Nick was a former Navy pilot and founder of an LA-based viral marketing company, Shareability, producing content for brands. He's bringing Hollywood to Milken in London today. He worked at ICM, a leading Hollywood talented agency, and is an Oscar-winning producer. He's produced films including the Bourne series, Austin Powers, Meet the Parents, and Moulin Rouge. Paul Van Zyl, on my left, co-founder and CEO of myYet. It's a fashion brand that partners with artisans across the world. Before Paul was involved in myYet and founded myYet, he was Executive Secretary of South Africa's Post-Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as co-founding the International Centre for Transitional Justice. And last, Simon Woodruff, who's taken his hat off, which is a great disappointment. But Simon was founder of Yo Sushi, which is now in 100 restaurants around the world, and is extending the Yo brand into Yotel and also Yo Home, which is an apartment concept in Manchester that I'm sure we may talk more about. He was also the first dragon on the original Dragon's Den. So that's the fantastic panel we've got today. We're going to talk for about, I think, 35, 40 minutes and then take any questions. So if you've got any questions, please have them ready. So I wanted to start off talking about how the panel are working with brand purpose today. A recent study by Globescan shows that really many people, between 40 and 70%, depending on how you cut the consumer group, want to choose brands that have a clear purpose and act in the best interests of society. So I wanted to discuss to what extent brands and businesses are adapting to this reality. Andrea, do you feel you're winning in this space? Sorry, Natalie, sorry.
I will have to forgive you. I'm standing in for Andrea today.
Sorry.
I've been taken unwell, but so which is why we exchanged that look. So yes, from Avon's perspective, one of our founding principles 130 years ago was that we would give women the opportunity to earn money, as Hugh said earlier, 34 years before they had the right to vote. But also our founder, even back then, was visionary in terms of the need to give back to society and create something that was more than just a commercial organisation. So actually, I don't think this idea is anything new, certainly not for us. I think we're just articulating the need for purpose, and we know that we're all searching for purpose and meaning these days. So I think for some organisations, it's intrinsically part of who you are, and it's been with you for a long time. So for us at Avon, it's part of our DNA. But that isn't to say I don't think for anyone that's reverse engineered a search for purpose, it's any less authentic or meaningful.
Simon.
Well, Yo came from, there was a girl called Lika Siklatira who used to come to my office 20 years ago, and she'd go, how you doing, Lika? And she'd go, yo! You know, so it came from, you could say it was a very authentic place. It was us, it was what we were doing. But I think there's a bigger thing, which is that there's a sort of revolution going on in the world, which is kind of obvious to say with the politics that we see out there. And it's a revolution of the people It's sort of power to the people, really, what we started off in the 60s when we were doing our peace signs, and all the other things we did in those days. And I think the idea of corporate social responsibility and sort of brand, I don't like brand as a word anyway, but brand-led design marketing is not, people are too clever now. You can't invent it. You can't look at the really great brands, what Apple did for all those years, even what Bill Gates is doing now. Look at Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and all those things. Those kids are doing things because they want to, and it's absolutely sort of in their DNA. I was on the Trump week when he got elected, I was in San Francisco with a couple of 30-year-olds who I've known for a long time, a guy called Alex Chu, who did the $1 Million homepage, which I always thought was brilliant. He was the guy, he was going to Cambridge University, and he didn't have any money, and he looked at the pixels, and he counted 1 million pixels, and if he said, if I could sell every single one of those pixels for $1, and he did it. And he sold the logos on the $1 Million homepage, and another guy called Michael Acton Smith, who made a lot of money out of games, kids' game shows. And they just started a brand called Calm. And all Calm is a meditation app. And Luke Johnson, who's a friend of mine, has got it one thing wrong. He's always got, entrepreneurs don't do meditation. The truth is that these kids, they've done a meditation, and what they say is they're selling the antidote to stress. And they're a year and a half old, they're taking $8 million off a free app that you pay to upgrade. Now that is radical, I think, and these people are doing it because they want to do it. They haven't invented something just because it's there. And I think that is the future of brands. And what you guys, all of us, and you guys have to do is not think, how can I make my brand attractive to the customer? But the question is, who am I? Who are you? And who was the child growing up at 16 with dreams of their life and a future? And who are you, and what are you going to do for the world before you die? And actually, that's the world we're going to live in. That's what I think.
Nick, could I ask you, so why do you think this whole area is becoming more, I mean, Simon's touched on it, but why do you think this is becoming more important to people, consumers, younger people?
I think
driving it?
there's been a lot of studies, and the studies show that the new generation of kids are the most connected with the world that they've ever been, obviously, because of the internet. And social good and social conscience has never been stronger. And I think if you think about the old adage, which is you do business with people you like, a brand a brand has to stand for something. One of the exercises we do in my shop is that we imagine who the brand is. Is the brand a 35-year-old woman? Is she in a good mood? Is she in a bad mood? Where does she shop? Because the problem is, I think, ultimately people connect to personality. And so that personality has to also, is it a good person or a bad person? And just from the work that we've done and the research we've done, if you're known for someone who does sweatshops and stuff like that, the kids today just won't buy it. There's a point at which case everybody wants cheap stuff, but once you start doing social ungood, people won't buy. And you look at the success of like Tom's shoes, that is prevalent. And I think that a lot of that stuff comes out of more developed Western societies, but you see how that spreads. But I think fundamentally, if you go back to the first comment, which is you do business with who you like, right? The brand has to stand for something that is positive. And I think that, I think there's a moral responsibility that we all have to do good things and not cause negativity in the world. But I think also all the research studies show that if a brand has a social conscience, you can build upon that and grow. I'll give you one quick example. We had a small company in the United States called Fresh Pet. All they did was fresh pet food. The problem that they had was it was sold in the refrigeration section. So when you walk down the aisle of all the dried food, you never found it. So they had a big disconnect with the consumer because the consumer never knew where they were. So their whole thing was, we actually want to give animals really good food. So we basically created a program for them with shelters. And we did a series of video content, which was incredibly viral, where we just took dogs and showed them the most amazing ways. Over half the dogs that we used in the videos were from the shelter. And then what we also did is we got them to give one meal to every shelter for every share of the video. So they suddenly became completely symptomatic with animal lovers. Animal lovers want to help animals. So we basically aligned them by doing good. They gave away, I think, over 250,000 meals last year. Of all the animals that were featured in the video, they all got adopted. All the shelters around America basically got behind the program because it was good for them and it was good for the brand, and it was this wonderful alignment. Their business doubled over 12 months because of this affinity. It's one thing saying I love animals, which is why I'm giving you fresh food, but it's another thing to connect your love of animals to actually helping other people do social good. So I think that's a classic example where they did the right thing, and the results was they doubled their earnings in 12 months. I mean, and there's loads of examples I'm sure you guys have.
Well, Mike, I mean, perhaps not doubling earnings in 12 months, but you're
Small company.
running a very different kind of business, which has used social good throughout its history in many ways. Does Live Well for Less embody this spirit, this idea?
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, Sainsburys is a brand that's existed for 147 years, and many of the things that we do engender the trust of our customers. And as well as being brands that people like, the other important thing from our perspective is a brand that you trust as a customer. You trust us to do the right thing. And in an organisation that now employs 200,000 people, and if you look at the supply chains that we operate, many thousands of people beyond that, making sure that we're doing the right thing throughout our supply chains is an absolute basic minimum. And that's a really difficult thing in the world that we live in. I have numerous examples where a relatively small thing that happens in our organisation can become a phenomenon on social media within minutes. The world that we were used to of a sort of command and control organisation has almost been turned on its head, because we have to, and we do, devolve a lot more responsibility through our supply chains to our people to allow them to make the right decisions on the ground in real time. And that's a very different world to the world that we would have been used to.
And are there any specific initiatives that have come out of that, which you've spotted something and thought, that's an interesting area, how can we build on that?
Something which is absolutely front and centre of our customers' minds as we sit here today is the whole issue of food waste, and it has lots of dimensions to it. If you went back 10 or 15 years ago, it wouldn't have featured at all on people's personal agenda. It's now the single biggest corporate social responsibility issue for customers in the UK. Right. We have to recognise that, and we have to do something about it. Yeah. But it's one of these things where, from a customer point of view, it's very important, but actually there are many commercial reasons why it makes sense as well. And the really smart thing to do is to be able to join up the brand promise with things which make commercial sense, as well as act as a dimension that protects the brand as well. And food waste would be a classic example of that, where we're doing a lot of work on how we reduce the waste in our supply chains, the waste that we create in our customers' homes. So all of those things are top and front and centre of our...
Okay, it's very interesting. So we're going to come back to that, because I think there's an interesting thing about kind of long-term and short-term business objectives on that. I just want to bring Paul in here. So you've started a very different kind of brand. What was the catalyst for myYet?
As you said, I previously served as the Executive Secretary of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So was a human rights lawyer by training and worked in the next door office to Archbishop Tutu. So probably one of the more unlikely people to start a fashion brand. But I think it really started from an impulse of trying to give people the dignity of work and try to build a business that at its core had a core social mission, and recognizing this idea that artisans in developing economies had these extraordinary skills, and those skills were very often underutilized and trapped in a local economy. But if you took that skill seriously, if you built in a proper design direction so that you worked with people and you enabled those skills to be amenable to markets where people could and wanted to pay, then you could build a brand. And I think part of the kind of fundamental insight is that you have to build a brand that people want regardless of the purpose, but it is enhanced by the purpose. And I think that's a very, very important, you can't make an extraordinary yogurt which is made by single cows and family-owned farms in Vermont, and it tastes terrible, but you don't get antibiotics in it. It's got to be great yogurt as well, and the same applies, I think, across all the categories that you work in. The product's got to work, and then it's got to be infused with a soul. And I wanted to pick up with, I agree. I don't think people. I think if you start off by saying, I want to, cannily craft a pro-social brand, I think it's less authentic than saying, there's something deep that's compelling me to do something, and I'm going to kind of figure it out around something that's driving me. And maybe just to sort of say a quick anecdote, cashmere is a real commodity, and about 3 years ago we sat down and said, I'm not sure we really understand the supply chain of cashmere. And so we started investigating, and the people who are at the real front end of cashmere production are nomadic herders, and in our case we went to Mongolia to find these really remarkable nomadic herders. And our sense was, let's try and source cashmere from these herders, but let's try and do something that fundamentally improves their lives, because being a nomadic herder in Mongolia is a tough life. And I think our working hypothesis was, if you went up to those herders and said, what do you want? They'd say a school or a well or something like that. And their systematic answer to us is, we want you to pay for a program that inoculates our goats. And the reason they said that was because the goat herds during winter die down from 100 notionally to 70, and then breed back up to 100. But if you inoculate the goats, they die down to 90, and then they breed up to 120. And so inoculation is the kind of key tool to create compound interest in goats. And the more that you can grow a goat herd, the more that you can put money in the pockets of herders. And so what we did is we paid for that program, and then we took it to the world's finest cashmere mill in Italy and had that certified cradle to cradle. And so you had ethically sourced, sustainably produced cashmere. And then we've used it in our own products, but we've also white labeled it and made it available to other brands. And in the last 2 weeks, 2 giant brands have bought the cashmere and are putting it into their supply chain. And that's because it's high quality, it's got beautiful fiber length, it's got the right microns of diameter, it's spun in the world's finest mill, it's sustainable, so it's a great product, but it also has a wonderful, soulful story behind it. And it started from that impulse rather than to kind of create a kind of cashmere marketing scheme. That I don't think is the right way to do it.
Okay, it's very interesting. So it really built on this very, very authentic sort of set of circumstances that had kind of brought something into the world. Natalie, could we talk about, Avon's kind of founding principles about empowering women? That's a similar kind of story in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we were
idea-led rather than product.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, to the point on yogurt, when you come to a lipstick, you can buy a lipstick from anybody you want. But actually, we make decisions with our head and heart, and it needs to be more than just a product. I think the Avon stories, we were set up by a man called David H. McConnell 130 years ago. He sold books door to door, and he gave away those little vials of perfume with them, almost as a gift with purchase. Then he realised that people weren't actually buying the books, they just wanted the perfume. So from then on, he set up a company that was originally called the California Perfume Company, and he recruited the first ever Avon lady, a lady called Mrs. Albee, 130 years ago. So there we are, 34 years before women had the right to vote. I think a time when only 20% of women worked outside of the home, with this woman recruiting other women, building their own teams, their own networks, and earning their own money. And there is a correlation between financial independence and more generic female empowerment. So that element of this Avon sisterhood, our Avon ladies, actually now whether they're in it for the money, and there are lots of examples all over the world of where women have transformed their lives by selling Avon and building Avon teams. There are others that are just in it because they love the network, they love the products, they love the sense of meaning and confidence that it gives to them. But that's intrinsically part of who we are. So supporting women's causes, kind of going back to it needing to be authentic, it naturally falls in with where we are and who we are. It's part of our DNA.
Simon, do you think it's possible to, if you don't have an authentic history or story, can your brand adopt one?
No.
Can't create
No, I don't think either. I think what I said before, really, you can't make it up. No, I think it's quite interesting on this panel because, there's some disparate people who've actually got different jobs to do.
Yeah.
And on my right is a political entrepreneur who's gone out and done something commercially, and amazing mixture, right? Cool. And then Sainsburys, you're the caretaker for a long-term business. Much more difficult to do that, and if I may say so, I think Sainsbury's do it pretty well.
Thank you.
But nothing compared to what will happen in the next 50 years. I mean, I think if you look forward, the thing that I was thinking, what's the fundamental about your job? And I think that the world we're in is that if you shop at Sainsbury's, you probably have a reasonably tough life compared to anybody in this room. If you shop at Aldi's, you probably have an even tougher life. And actually, your job is to make that life better for those people. And you're nodding, I'm sure you've thought about that. But I think that's the long-term thing of all of this. So it's not just about brand, it's about what you're actually doing for people in society. Because, you know, the real fundamentals are that we all want to make money for our shareholders, and we all want to make money for ourselves. And then underneath that, we all want to be happy ourselves, and we all want to live in a happy community. And once you get down to that, what we were brought up with in our lives as we grew up, which was this thing called the bottom line, which is about return to shareholders. And gradually the change that's happening is that I say that there's a new bottom line, and certainly there's a new bottom line in the kids who are growing up. And I never be able to put my finger on it. The nearest I could ever get to say is why are these kids doing and building these companies? It's because they want to. And what's a remarkable, but slightly off kilter here, but part of the revolution is that there's people like Mark Zuckerberg and lots more to come who are going to be very rich, very young in their lives. And what are they going to do with the rest of their lives? You know, which I think has enormous hope. And I think those are the leaders. And I think companies like Sainsbury's, or bigger companies, which will probably be by that time, you know, it's easy, when you start something, it's easy to put a culture in place. When you run something like, I don't know, the post office or telecoms or Sainsbury's, it's much harder to create change. And I think what's really interesting about what you said was that you devolve responsibility all the way down. And that's what I've always talked about, is that there's no longer leadership from the boardroom, people sitting in cufflinks in boardrooms directing. It's actually empowering people like entrepreneurs right through organizations to make things happen. Anyway, I've gone off the track. But
Can I just pick up on one thing you said? So I'm the oldest guy in my company. My company is basically 20-year-olds. And to your point, Simon, it's like I don't actually teach them. I don't tell them what to do. All I really do is kind of explain the issues that we want to solve. And then all I do is I kind of guide and support their answers. Because I think that if you're selling to millennials or any age you want to say, to be older than the demo is not very helpful. And I think that more than ever now, so I think I read somewhere that's something like, if you hire people up to the age of about sort of 25 years old, they're kind of very native with social. And it's the people in the middle that are problematic because they're trying to learn social, and that's where a lot of the breakdown is. But I do think in the next sort of 10 years, as those 20, 25-year-olds become 25 to 35, all the sort of senior people in marketing will be native social. And right now there is this disconnect, which is coming together very, very fast. And I think that the job that at least I look at is that I have to embrace the young people to tell me what is going on, and then I guide the philosophy of how I'm going to use that to help the brand. But I think the idea of 20, 30 years ago, where maybe someone in my position would actually tell people what we're going to do, is kind of reversing now. And I think we just have to admit that, you know, there are people that have come into my office who are 14 years old who have analyzed the project we worked on and said things that you just go like, what? And there's just this, they grew up in this world. And I live in the digital space, and in my world, I have 3 to 5 seconds to get your attention. Because of this button, you know, this finger, if you don't like my headline, or if you don't like the first 3 seconds of video, you're gone. And I think that speaks to the fact that, you know, what Sainsbury's has done very well again, and also Avon has done, and also Paul, not to do, and Simon, is like we're in the value business. And I think if you can add value to someone's life and that becomes a business, that's where all the growth is going to be. And kids today, we keep hearing the word authentic, can find out if you're lying to them. So if you have a product for a good price, but you're doing it in a very bad way, they will find out, and your business will fall apart. But I think really my only message is that you have to listen to the new generation, because they know what's going on. What we have to do as business people is actually then try and figure out how to use that information to help grow the business.
I know you're dealing with a slightly, numbers in your identity very, very different to Mike. how this different leadership style that everyone's touching on, how do you unite everyone in a big organisation behind a common purpose? And
it's an interesting paradox because we employ 20,000 people who've worked for us for 20 years. We employ people who don't understand social media. If you start introducing technologies like access to personal data on mobile phones, they don't know how to do this. We employ 50,000 people under the age of 25. And so one of our challenges is to deal with, first of all, a workforce of 200,000 who have very different experiences and life aspirations, but also a customer base of 27 million people a week, a significant number of who don't have any access to the kind of technologies you're talking about. 20% of the UK population will be over the age of 60 in 5 years' time. And that generation is very different to the generation that you're referring to. But in the end, the core principles are the same. You have to engender trust, and you have to do that in a way that frames it for the various constituencies that you are talking to. You go back to the history of Sainsburys.
Yeah.
Sainsburys was founded on the principle of selling safe food when the railways came to London in the 1860s. And in many ways, our purpose today is similar, albeit that the framework has changed. So live well for less as the sort of central idea that sits behind the brand, and then applying that to what we do on a day-to-day basis is very much at the heart of what we're doing as a business. But it is in a very different world and across a very different platform. With 27 million customers a week, you have to have a core purpose that applies right across the business. Otherwise, you won't be successful.
I
The point was made earlier.
Just building on that, there is sometimes, I think, a misconception that it's only millennials, and I hate even using the word because it's so tiresome, but it's only millennials who are seeking purpose, and it's only millennials who care about whether brands have a social conscience. It's not. To that point about needing to really unify a broad church, the people who I know who have worked at Avon for 20, 30 years do so because they genuinely believe in the power of the business to change women's lives. That's why someone who is 18, 20, 30 joins us. It's why someone who's 60 stays. I think it goes beyond that millennial population.
And it's very humbling. When I talk to people who work for us for 20 years, in some cases 30 years, in some cases 40 years, I've actually given somebody a 60-year service badge in the recent past. Somebody who's 85 years old and still working for our organisation. They are the pillars of the communities that we serve. They are the people that are the community leaders, the carers, and that's an aspect of our business that quite often doesn't get recognised.
And do you think having a kind of purpose like this, does that kind of keep you relentlessly in touch with the outside world? Is it a kind of guiding light?
Yeah,
that allows the whole company to be...
Absolutely, unless you do this, unless, I spend a huge amount of my time talking to our colleagues in our shops and absolutely recognise unless they are doing the right things in the communities that they serve, we won't be successful as a business. And many of those things are voluntary, many of the things are unpaid, many of the things are societal goods which go way beyond the commercial imperative that we have on a day-to-day basis.
And interesting that you mentioned, Sainsbury's kind of founding ethos, clean food in the 1880s, 1890s. 1860s, sorry. Is there something going on contextually right now? I mean, we talk about the founding principles of Unilever, Lord Lever creating soap in order to propagate cleanliness. Cadbury, playing fields of Bourneville, very much about this idea of a happier workforce. Is there something going, and this is obviously a kind of Victorian theme behind this, where conditions for workers weren't great. Is there something going on in the world right now, or has been over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, that is bringing this whole idea of brand purpose, social good, more to the fore for business?
I think so fundamentally. I think the Brexit, Trump, Italy, quick succession, a sense that the kind of a particular order is being upended and disrupted, and a sense that we are now living in a time where we may be the first and the last generation who has it in our power to do something really serious about climate change. And I think that there are a group of people who are coming into the workforce who don't necessarily have the kind of job security that you had 20 or 30 years ago, who see climate change as not something that you can deny, but something that is going to profoundly, deeply, materially impact their lives. And I think these are existential things for people. And they can be scary and they can be disempowering. And that group of people can succumb to, the siren songs of populism. Or there's a more optimistic, and I would suggest preferable route. And I think there is this kind of seed of entrepreneurship that is happening, where people can start saying, I'm not going to wait for my political leaders who are, making some rather odd decisions to kind of save me. I'm going to kind of take my destiny into my own hands, and I'm going to start something, I'm going to work on something. And I think that can be very, very empowering to say to people, you can work in a business and found a business and do something with purpose, because it gives you a sense of agency. And I think a lot of our energy and our passion, our policy making work, if you are in government, but more importantly, if you have access to capital, is to create an ecosystem to put wind in those people's sails.
Yeah.
How do you provide tax systems which incentivize people to set up those kinds of businesses? How do you create ecosystems which enable people to be mentored and supported? How do you bring creative people together with entrepreneurial people, together with not-for-profit people, to be able to create that kind of petri dish where these sorts of businesses and endeavors flourish? We're doing a private members club in Conduit Street in Mayfair, which is attempting to kind of do precisely this, is to try and support people who are trying to start businesses and get on the front foot and be proactive, partly because I think it's a response to the kind of challenge of our time. And it's also it's positive. How many dinner parties do you have to go to where you lament the politics of our time? After a while, you can spend an entire dinner party lamenting and not doing anything positive. And it's much more interesting to do things that are positive.
It seems to me this is a very, very different style of sort of strategic leadership, though. Needing to bring in different partners, the whole supply chain, thinking about the long term, managing the short term. Mike, how do you balance all that? Can you balance all that? I mean, it's
well, in the end, our customers expect us to balance it. So, one of the points absolutely that our customers trust us with is that we understand where the stuff that we sell comes from, and that we take responsibility for the supply chains that we operate. And that is a very different world to the world I originally grew up in. I've been in this industry for 30 years. And I think it was a wake-up call when Nike were held to account for where their shoes were made. As far as they were concerned, it was one step away from their core brand. And for us, that's a big part of our lives, is understanding, to the point that was made earlier, where we source our products, the standards that not just we apply, but also our suppliers apply. And in a complex series of world supply chains, actually working a way through those is an incredibly complex thing to do. And in a world of social media and instant communication, if you don't do it well, you will ultimately be held to account for it. And ultimately that will undermine the trust that's been built up over 147 years in our case. And that's a difficult thing to do, because many of the supply chains we operate have 2, 3, 4, the cashmere supplier will be supplying somebody who weaves it, who then colours it, who then makes it up. And there's probably 4 or 5 different steps in that supply chain, and that's not dissimilar to our clothing business. Very complex thing to do, but ultimately something our customers absolutely demand that we do.
Nick, do you want to talk to us a little bit about technology and how?
Sorry, I was just... I mean, what you guys are doing in terms of supply chain you talk about is just so amazing. I mean, we believe if you create a positive sentiment about the brand, going back to my earlier comment, if you buy from people that you like, we did a case study recently for a telecom company, not sexy whatsoever, and we literally came to this issue of social good. And we basically developed a program for them of things that we thought were interesting. And I think fundamentally, you have to listen to the consumer and you have to give value to the consumer, because ultimately your consumer is your community. So the way I look at it is that you actually, just like a human relationship, you have to have a relationship with someone based on mutual interests. We did one project for this telecom company They did an internal case study, which they shared with us afterwards. A lot of the numbers were just kind of like comic book numbers in terms of the hundreds of percents of improvement in all different categories. But the fundamental reason that made them, that they were completely shocked by, was telecom companies generally, everyone hates, I'm paying too much, I didn't use that, I didn't do this. So after this one particular project we did, they had a 40% lift in sentiment about the brand, right? But the thing that made them so happy was that they had a 300% conversion. So when you have a choice of multiple places to go shop or go buy, again, I believe that if you like someone, you now have a better advantage of getting their business. But they literally, in this case, they had something on the website that they were doing. They had a 300% increase in conversion because people went there with a completely different point of view about who they are. I think a question was answered earlier, can you build trust in a brand? I think trust is the most important thing. You talk about Sainsburys, you go there, whatever happens, right, you're in the zone of safety. Right, you could argue whether it's a penny more or a penny less, but what you're going to come out with is going to be absolutely safe and good value, right? And that makes it a very safe place to go. And I think with brands like telecom, where right now I'm in the space and I get confused on all the offers, you just want to be in business with someone that you trust. And I think how you communicate to the consumer your values that gives you trust. And I think if you can get that. So to me, fundamentally, positive sentiment about your brand, to me, is one of the most important things you can do. And if you get positive sentiment, more people will come and shop and buy from you. And I think, talking about what you talked about, Paul, talking about inoculating the goats. I mean, that's just, amazing. There should be much, much more of that. And I think, and I'm sure you've seen your results, but when you show people that you're giving them a great product for a decent price, but how you're doing it is actually what you're actually representing and giving back is phenomenal, you're going to see the business grow, because kids today will find out, in the Nike case, if you're actually taking advantage of someone, and I don't think the average kid today will put up with it.
Now, you touched on many things there, but I want to pick up on this whole idea of measurement, because you've given some fantastic numbers there. Brand purpose, social good, winning. Natalie, how do you measure this at Avon? Is it absolutely a business and brand measure joined together, or is it?
For us, yes, because of our business model. So there are two things that we measure. One is around our charitable giving. So we're the world's largest supporter of women's causes, domestic violence and breast cancer. So we absolutely set ourselves targets for and measure that. But that actually is separate to basically the number of Avon ladies we have. So our purpose is to give women the opportunity to set up their own business, whether that's a small scale business or a business where they're kind of running kind of multi-million-dollar or multi-million-pound businesses. So the number of Avon ladies we have is directly linked to the number of women who we are empowering, which is a key indicator for us, because our Avon ladies are our retail stores. So for us, it's embedded in the model. I think for other brands, other organisations, it's a bolt-on. But again, I don't necessarily think that means that it isn't less meaningful.
Simon, you mentioned the new bottom line. Would you have a measurement criteria for the new bottom line? Or is that?
In a way, it's not my job personally to be the measurer of that. I started Yo Sushi. They've got 100 restaurants and they've got a big research team, and they do all of that stuff just like you guys do. And I'm absolutely sure I don't know the actual answer to that, but yes, they do. And our hotel business now, we have 5 hotels, including 700 rooms in New York, and we're building another 7, 8, 9 hotels around the world. And I'm not really involved in that. I'm more of a starter. But I used to sit on a lot of charity boards, and I stopped doing it because I found that I was just another voice. We live in a world where everybody has a voice about what to do. The difficult part is that Felix Dennis poem, which you should read. It's called How to Get Rich. And it starts off, ideas, we've had them since Eve first met Adam. But take it from me, execution's the key. And his last verse is actually, the first step, just do it and bluff your way through it. Remember to duck, Godspeed and good luck. But when I stopped sitting on those charity boards, we have got a Yo Foundation now, which we take some of our royalties and put into that, and I think that's the new sort of step for us. But I decided to try and do my bit to change things, one person at a time. And that's what I would say to all of you, because if we're all sitting here as a panel what is our purpose for sitting here? Our purpose is to try to influence you and each other, and possibly to have some of it recorded to influence more people. And so what can you do about it? And I think the question you and we should all be asking is, what can I do as an individual today within my organisation, or just with people I meet? And that's the real question to ask every single day of our lives. What can I do today to make a difference, to make things change?
I mean, I would say one thing about impact. I think it's important to be kind of modest and also to admit complexity in this space, because I come back to the cashmere story. The more you grow the size of goat herds, the more you have a grassland management question. And the more you have sustainability concerns and livelihood concerns living side by side. So built into the program, we've now had to think about how do you work with herders to think about interesting herd rotation programs so that the goat herds don't then eat all the grass and then you get erosion and it's not sustainable, right? When you're working with hand weavers of silk, if it's a exquisite, beautiful, century-old tradition of hand weaving silk, you can extract enormous value from that if that is properly presented and properly marketed. The wealth that can be transferred from a hand-woven silk, it can only really exist in the world as a luxury product because it's too expensive to make. But if you do it properly, there is a market for luxury hand-woven silk, and those weavers can get double or triple what they would otherwise get if it's properly marketed. But it's not employment creation, it's greater amount of wealth per hour worked for weavers. If you're wanting in places with enormous amount of unemployment to actually give a larger number of people the dignity of work, you wouldn't invest in luxury silk. You'd actually invest in a different way of producing silk. So you can then go broad and create more employment at lower wages, or you can go deep and create less employment at higher wages. And these are kind of, it's economics 101, it's development economics 101 as well. And so I think, the field as a whole, there are thousands of conferences and too much ink that's been spilt in how you measure impact. And I'm actually would prefer never to have those conversations and rating systems and mechanisms that just shoot me. But what I would like us to do is be able to say, when you're doing it, go and do it. And then when you do it, be really thoughtful and modest about the trade-offs and the results, and are you achieving it, and interrogate it yourself, because other people will. But it's also, leading a curious life and trying to change the world involves thinking about things in a more careful way.
Interesting. Last night there was a Milken event, and a lot of the conversation was about global talent and how you attract the best talent. Is this whole space of brand purpose, is this a big area? Is it a magnet for talent at any level? We often talk about talent, we often think of people in their 20s, but is it a great way of bringing the best people into entrepreneur businesses?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what everybody wants to work for. They all want to go and work for Virgin. They all want to go and work for Apple. They all want to work for us and it's a great way of attracting people. I mean, it's the best recruitment thing you can do, and everything fits together.
Mike?
No, I agree. Again, it's on a different scale, but it's one of the core principles of our recruitment. If people will want to work for a brand that they relate to and the brand that they trust, it's exactly the same underlying principle as why customers would choose to shop with you. But I was quite interested to hear, none of these things are black and white. This is one of the other challenges running a very large corporation. We sell 250 million things every week, and every one of those has to apply to a certain standard. But against the point you made, there are different judgments that people would make on the rights and wrongs of the choices that you make when you sell those products. And again, threading your way through the ambiguity of some of the shades of grey that you have to deal with is incredibly difficult. And in the end, you do have to rely on people. I say do the right thing, but quite often the right thing is not clear. Yes, and most of the things that come across my desk are in the sort of 45, 55. Right, and yet in the court of public opinion, you're judged in very black and white terms.
Yes.
And that is an incredibly difficult space for
and the press are kinder to you, and I know this, they're kinder to you if you come from that place. As soon as you step across that red line of trying to be clever or trying to make more out of something, you get shot down. They're very human, the press. They're extremely unfair. they're much nicer than nice people.
I mean, Archbishop Tutu used to say, you know, one of the great things in life is what you do when you make a mistake. And the most important lesson, and people just never learn it, is to fess up and to immediately say you've made a mistake and to come clean about it. And during the life of the Truth Commission, we made one really fundamental mistake, and the entire team around him said, well, here's how we can spin it, this is how we can frame it, this, you know, there are 1,000 ways in which we can do lots of damage control. And he said, we made a mistake, call a press conference for 3 o'clock, I'm going to go out there. And he sat down and said, we made a mistake. It was a big mistake. And let me explain why we did it, but it was a big mistake. It was the 3rd page, bottom left-hand side of the main newspaper, and ran for 1 day, and it was over. And if he had followed the advice of the kind of people around him who were trying to manage it, it would have been a running sore of a story for weeks on end.
Again, it's an interesting paradox that if you went back 5-10 years, the world before social media, maybe it was more than 5 or 10 years, you had more time to think. Yeah. You know, I found myself in a situation where something had happened in one of our stores, and it was on, because somebody had tweeted it, it was on the news bar of the BBC before our own internal mechanisms brought it to my attention. Now, it took us about half an hour for it to get to me, but the BBC had it online within 15 minutes. That's the world that we live in, which goes back to the point about needing to devolve more responsibility, because we've got 25-year-old kids who monitor our Twitter feeds and have to give an instant response to some things which can be quite publicly or quite high-profile issues. And those are the kind of things that you have to get used to in this world, where you're dealing with ambiguity. And to your point, you have to respond incredibly quickly and fess up.
Fantastic. So quick responses, devolving responsibility. We've got some time for some questions now, I think. So there's a couple of mics roving around. Yes, over there, please. Could you introduce yourself, perhaps? Just give us a name and where you're from. Can we have a mic down here, please, on the left-hand side? Thank you.
Hello, David Landsman from the Tata Group. We've been in India for 150 years with a strong sense of purpose, but we've arrived in other parts of the world more recently, primarily through acquisitions. So we're very interested in how purpose can kind of be there organically or can grow. And I was very interested in Paul's comment about not liking metrics very much and wanting to shoot himself. Whenever I hear from the CSR professionals, and apologies to any in the room, I want to get my gun out, and I don't normally want to turn it on myself. If, as I think the panel suggested, authenticity is the secret of success in this space, do we need the CSR professionalized world? Do we need reporting systems which report essentially to a corporate audience, or should we be looking for a different way of seeing what works and replicating it?
Look, when racial discrimination was going on when I was growing up as a kid, we made laws as a country that says you weren't allowed to be racially discriminating. What's happened is it's changed culture. And what happens in this world is that when something's too far one way, it has to swing too far the other way, and then it becomes part of culture. So I think, yes, you have to make laws, you have to decide that things that actually happen. We need corporate social responsibility. It's a horrible word, I'd rather it didn't exist. I think everything is on track in the world. We're all in exactly the right place. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been sitting here saying what we're saying today. We'd have been much more cynical on shareholder return type people. It's swinging back further that way. And eventually, everything's on track and it's okay. And eventually, we won't even use corporate social responsibility because next generation it will just be normal.
Yeah, you need, in my view, you do need measures, because otherwise you won't change, to the point that's made earlier, the framework, and people will not be held to account for doing the right things in the right way. But equally, that doesn't get away from the fact that in an organisation like ours, you rely on 200,000 people making the right decision in the moment for all of the customers that we serve week in, week out. And that means you have to have an incredibly central core purpose and understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. And no amount of corporate measurement will get away from that core fundamental principle.
The one thing, though, and I speak as the guy who has the least number of employees, and so I'm luckier to manage it easier, but I think ultimately the success of big companies are ultimately about the core culture, because the person that starts in your shop for the first time knows what Sainsbury's stands for, right? So there's a core feeling of what you represent. So I think, again, with those brands that haven't really found a social voice, or at least a core voice of what they stand for, if you join that company, you're not quite sure how you're meant to act. So I think if you, clearly, again, in Paul's case, if you go work for Paul, you know exactly how he's passionate about it and what his dream is. You're not going to have someone who's rude, who's trying to sell you something that's really expensive that, has not been done in the most appropriate organic manner. So I think ultimately culture is the most important thing, because if you have a core culture that everyone understands exactly what you stand for, you will then attract people to that culture, and then hopefully it limits problems on the shop floor when you've got employee 200,001 interacting with a customer.
I think the most...
Sorry. Any other questions? There's one gone.
Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm from Cerner. I know Paul actually from the world of human rights law. I used to work for DFID in the UN. And I set up Cerner Solutions. What we look at is modern slavery issues, conflict, and violent extremism and other things. But a thing I'm really struck by is we work with governments, NGOs, and business to look at, we call it, the golden triangle, trying to get at some of these issues. And if you look at the panorama thing on slavery in Turkey, a critical issue there is that, as you go through your supply chain, you try and do good. You actually kind of want to tap into what the development sector is doing in those spaces to work out how to kind of better deal with those. Those children are always going to be, there are willing slaves out there today. They're always going to be in those supply chains. You need to give them kind of alternate livelihoods. And there needs to be more link up between business and development actors and government and NGOs to kind of solve these issues. And I think to that point about measurement, as I've come into this space, I am really struck by, we know that businesses in the UK are really struggling to implement the Modern Slavery Act, and they're struggling around how to do due diligence and risk assessment based on. I come from a development background. We kind of take a rights-based approach. We know how to talk to stakeholders. When I look at the way compliance is being done, I think it's a misfit with what is needed to get at some of these, what I would call, as you talk about social good, kind of the bottom of the iceberg, the stuff that's going down in supply chains right at the end of where there are slaves, making the lipstick somewhere, and are you getting at that? And I think there's a real innovation needs to happen around how we do due diligence. I'd like your views on that. If you feel that you're really being served well by the compliance that's going on, and I don't think we are. I think there needs to be a systemic shift to get at it better, so we can kind of honestly talk to consumers about what's going on.
The question is about compliance. Natalie, do you want to?
I think from an Avon perspective, I totally line up with things that my fellow panelists have said in terms of, we set out, everybody I think sets out to do the right thing. I think the point about needing to over-regulate is a really good one, and I'd wholeheartedly support that until you get to the right point in the middle. I think the best thing that we can do is go in with the right intentions and be as diligent as we possibly can. And that doesn't mean that somewhere to the nth degree of the supply chain there's something beyond our control or our visibility that we wouldn't want to tackle straight away if we saw it. And that's where I would stand on it.
Sorry, go on, Paul.
Well, I just want to say, I think that the way that you test it is the people who drive deep social impact and change in companies are not CSR people, and they're not marketing people. They're the budget holders who are responsible to be accountable for the P&L of those companies. CSR departments, if they were there, if they are an innovation resource to the budget holders who are responsible for delivering the company's bottom line, can be enormously helpful. But to the extent that the company does X and then CSR arrives and tries to reverse engineer mission in a way that is misaligned with the company's core economics, that's when I think CSR does itself and the term and the field a disservice. The greatest progress we've ever made at myYet is when our head of production became evangelical about supporting artisans, because she was going, I'm going to find the best fabrics at prices that make sense, that also work with our artisans, because if I do that and they sell, I can go back to them again and again and again, season after season after season, and change their lives. If it's do something and then make a beautiful video about it and it's misaligned with the underlying economics, you're not building a sustainable business.
I think we've got time for one more question. You had one down at the front.
I'm probably loud enough.
Yeah.
My name is George Lee from the Age of No Retirement. I've got a do you think if organisations actually had to communicate a two-pillared profit communication, social profit and financial profit, we would start driving pioneering change in a much faster way?
Simon.
I think it's already starting, actually. I mean, I think the recent government initiative to limit the wages of executive boards in private companies, amazing that they should do that. I'm pro it. I mean, I'm pro those forms of, as you said, over-regulation, so that it creates change. And I think that is the job of government, is not to help us, really, other than deregulating the itsy-bitsy of life, but to actually create social change. And this, I think that we'll be judged quite well, actually, this recent period, this last 10, 15 years, I think will be post-Mandela and all of that, I think we'll be judged quite well for how we're changing in the commercial area, this commercial area. We're not talking here about the manufacturing business, we're not talking about the City of London, who I think will be held very, very culpable when history judges over this period of time. But I think we're doing the right thing, and I think the young entrepreneurs are, and I think we're leading the way, and I think everything is on track.
Our time is up. So I hope you've learned a lot from this fantastic panel, that brand purpose can be a real catalyst for change in the world. Thanks, everyone.